Hello everybody, I thought I'd make a behind the scenes slash how-to video of the two retouches that were featured in the Gibson Brands episode of AMC's The Pitch. The producers of the show had me record my screen while I retouched these shots, and I thought since the recordings didn't make the cut, I'd show them here with some commentary. If you caught the episode, you saw a little bit of what went into getting the shots we needed in the photo studio. This video will show what it took Photoshop-wise to complete the face melting retouch. You can find a link in the description below for the retouch we called speaker mouth, so you can see what went into the retouch of that image as well. Before I start, I thought I'd give two shout-outs. One is for David Bean. David is an amazing photographer here in Nashville, Tennessee. If you check out the retouch work on my website, a link for that is also in the description below. But most of the work, retouch work featured on my site, was produced working with David Bean as my photographer. You can also find a link to his website as well down below in the description. I love working with him. It's so important to work with a photographer that you can talk to and bounce ideas off of, and more importantly, knows your retouch process, and he certainly does. This cuts down on time in the studio, so huge thanks to him. Love working with David. The other shout out is to another David Wright. He was also on the pitch episode, and I really appreciate him sitting in that chair and letting me pour liquid makeup all over his face and into his mouth. He was a real sport about it. As far as talent, it's so important to get somebody that won't hold back and will trust you, and David did an awesome job at both of those things. So let's get into some background information before we begin the video. As far as process, this is my process, and that means it may not be your process. Everybody needs to find a process that works for them. I love going into the photo studio with a pretty strict roadmap of what I want after talking about it with the photographer. Some people might say that process doesn't allow for creative exploration, but I haven't had an issue with that. I love going in there, getting what I want, getting what the client wants, and getting out, especially if budgets and time frames are tight. And as far as the pitch episode is concerned, both of those were an issue, the budget and the time frame. I also love to do as much work in the photo studio as possible to reduce work in Photoshop. If I can create an effect in the studio, I'd rather do that than sit at a computer and create it from scratch. I'm not a big fan of illustration layered over photography, but I am a huge fan of options within that strict roadmap I was talking about. In the case of this retouch, we shot hundreds of shots to achieve one image. You'll see that I whittled down those shots to about 24 before I began retouching. So in the end, it took hundreds of shots to get 24 shots that I composited together for this retouch. In the end, it took 3.5 hours to complete this retouch. If you're watching the clock in the upper right corner of the video, you'll see jumps in the time frame. That's because I didn't have the luxury of doing this in one continuous sitting. We were all scrambling to get every aspect of the campaign done, and I had to jump up and get some other things done with the rest of the team in order to meet our deadline. Don't worry, this video is not going to be 3.5 hours long. I've sped up the time to compress it down to about 24 minutes. That's as fast as I can make it and still allow you to see what I did. So let's begin. Okay, so the first thing that I do when I begin a retouch is find what I call the base image. This is the image that's going to lay the foundation for the rest of the retouch. All of the other images are going to be composited on top of this one. Now that may not be the case for all the retouches that I do, but in this case it is true. How I landed on this particular base image was David's facial expression. When we were in the photo studio together, I told him, you need to look like you're in ecstasy. Your face is melting, but it's a good face melting. Whatever you're hearing in those headphones is putting you into ecstasy. So I landed on this one pretty quickly. It's a great shot, great facial expression, kind of says it all. So next up, it's going through and finding which images we're going to composite on top of this base image. In this case, we're starting with the eyes. And speaking about the strict roadmap that I like to keep to when I go into the photo studio, I knew I wanted the skin around David's eyes to appear as if it's pulling away from where it belongs. So in this case, I just asked him to reach up and grab that skin around his cheek and pull down as hard as he could. We did a couple different options on this to make sure we were kind of exploring everything within each one of these shots. We landed on these two images here. and I basically make note of my favorite shots in the photo studio as we're shooting, just scribbling down the image numbers to give me a reference. This kind of cuts down on file management time. Next up was finding the image that I was going to use for the lower lip, and just like the eyes, I just had David reach up there, grab his lower lip, pull it down as hard as he possibly could. Again, we did some options on this one as well, options with his tongue and whatnot. But one of the things that I made sure David kept doing was wetting his mouth. And, I talked a little bit about wanting to do effects in the photo studio whenever I could, and this is another example. I could definitely go in there and hand paint some highlights and make it look like his tongue is more wet than it is and whatnot. But if you could remember to have your talent, do little details like that, it helps reduce time in Photoshop. You'll see me later go in there and emphasize those highlights a little bit more, but the great thing is those highlights are real. They're based off the lighting that's in the studio itself, and I think it lends itself to adding a little bit more realism to the shot, even though this is obviously a surreal image in the end, but it kind of adds to the believability of the shot itself. So just grabbing the lip here that I wanted, throwing it in there, again getting just what I needed in order to keep file size down, and placing that lip where it belonged. From there, it was basically finding which dripping makeup shots that I wanted after that. In this case, I started with the drip over the eyebrow, small drip to kind of see how it was going to look. I usually don't like doing destructive things to my layers in Photoshop. But in this case, when the makeup didn't match the skin tone, I knew I wasn't going to undo that. So I went ahead and did a permanent color adjust to the layer in order to match up that makeup to the skin tone. Reduces layers and layer management as well. Again, whenever I cannot do something destructive, I definitely don't do it. But in this case, I thought it was okay to do. So the next 8 or 9 minutes are basically going to be of me sorting through all the raw shots, trying to find that drip image that looks great for one particular spot on his face. You're going to see some trial and error. I might throw a drip on there, see how it looks, take it off, manipulate it a little bit, make it shorter, longer. And it's just kind of a trial and error aspect. And that's what's great about getting as many options in the photo studio as possible. I had a whole bunch of dripping makeup shots to choose from and to pull from. And in the end, getting to a spot where everything looked the way I wanted it to look. At one point in time during this the next few minutes, you'll see me take a break from the melting aspect of the retouch and put a drop shadow under David's bottom lip. There was something about that was driving me out of my mind. I couldn't tell if it was the lip that wasn't working or the fact that there wasn't a drop shadow. So it was a little distracting. So I took a second and painted a drop shadow underneath there just to kind of get my mind off of that. And then I get back to the face melting aspect of the retouch. The next time I chime in, it'll probably be 5-6 minutes down the road. Enjoy watching this process of getting these drips onto his face. So at this point in the retouch, you'll see me take a break from retouching the melting drips onto his face, and I'll actually do a merge all and stretch out his face. At this point in the retouch, I wasn't sure if it was working necessarily, or that we just weren't going far enough with the retouch. So I thought, well, what if his entire face, skull, everything was literally just starting to move downward? And so I really quickly just merged all the work that I had done up to that point, and quickly stretched out to see if that would work. And the minute I saw that, I knew that's the direction that I wanted to go. So again, whenever you can take a break and feel better about the work that you're doing, in order to not think about it anymore, I suggest you do that. And in this case, I loved what I saw. I trashed the layer, knew I would eventually come back to that and do that at the end. So at this point, what I start to do is start making the refined adjustments to the melting face composite shots, making sure all the lines, edges of the drips are crisp, nothing's coming through from the base image below and the other images below, since I was using layer masks and feathering things out, just trying to kind of find all the mistakes and get rid of them. And at one point in time, you're going to start seeing me get rid of the highlights on the dripping makeup. David's face is obviously not that shiny, so if his face was melting, I'd like to think that it wouldn't all of a sudden turn shiny. So one of the things that had to be done is go in there and get rid of the really hard highlights in all of the dripping skin in order to make it look like it's actually his skin. And then at one point in time, I'll actually add some noise and clone texture from his skin in order to make it look more like skin instead of a smooth liquid. So here's the process of eliminating those highlights, going through and just kind of making this a little bit more realistic as far as making it look like his skin. So next is my favorite part of the retouch, and I can't tell if it's because I enjoy doing it or because I know it's the end of the retouch, and that is the color correction aspect of the retouch. I love doing this. Some people would call this a dodge and burn look. I myself have never used the dodge and burn tool ever. The way I get my highlights to look brighter is with the brightness and contrast adjustment. The way I get my shadows to look darker is with mid-tone curves adjustment. If you've got your own method, great. If you've got your own style, great. This is how I do it. And I've always done it, love doing it this way. And so basically it's going in here and just popping highlights, darkening shadows, making it look kind of like an illustrated look, a painted look, emphasizing the shadows on the drips to make them stand out a little bit more and have a contrast from the skin beneath it. And again, just kind of going through, I tend to start with shadows first and bring those out, and then move to highlights, and then it's just a process of getting back, looking at it, not liking something, going in there, increasing another aspect, pulling back, turning that down if I did too much. It's just kind of, again, a success failure kind of process in order to get what you're looking for. So at this point, you'll see me move down to David's shirt. Based on the design that we had laid out, I was pretty sure that I wasn't going to need any of his shirt, at least a large portion of his shirt. But whenever I can, if I could quickly move down and retouch every bit of the image if I can, in order to ensure that we have options in the future, whether it's for outdoor boards, a more horizontal layout, a more vertical layout. If I needed a little bit more image, and it's only going to take a few minutes to give the designers that option, then I'd rather do it. So in this case, that's why I kind of moved down and retouched David's shirt. Just to kind of give us some layout options in the future, because you never know what you're going to need later down the road. So what you're seeing here in this part of the retouch is I'm creating an 8.5 by 11 ratio crop window to kind of test the crop on it and make sure I have everything I need. I'll clean up the background. I'll create the dark blue gradient halo that's going to go behind David. And I'll make some final color adjustments and make sure everything is the way it needs to look. And the final thing I'll do is revisit the face stretching that I did earlier in the retouch to try it out to see if it would work. And the process behind that is basically merging all the work that I did into one layer. Of course, I keep all of the work in the individual layers below that merged layer in case I have to go back and do something and then re-merge and re-stretch if I have to. But I'd rather do it this way instead of grabbing all of the layers and stretching the image permanently. You never know when you have an unlinked layer mask or unlinked layer adjustment that could cause all kind of chaos in that move. So I just prefer to merge everything up, and I'm masking off aspects of that stretch and using elements that are still behind that stretched image in order to make everything look right. I duplicate the stretched image in order to kind of push out the headphone on the left side of his head there, and just kind of make sure I'm doing all the tweaks necessary to clean up that stretched face and make sure everything looks right. But in the end, this is it. This is the final image. After the face has been stretched, I'll check the crop, and one of the final things I do is merge together everything: the gradient, the stretched face, the everything but the crop window, essentially. The crop window is sitting on top of this merged layer, and I'll add a noise to the entire image just to give it a uniform texture over the entire image. It kind of helps unite all the retouches and give it, I like that noisy, gritty look to the image that the noise brings. And that's the finished image. I move on to the speaker mouth retouch next. Again, that retouch is below in the description. Take a look at that. At one point in time during that retouch, I'll pull up this retouch and put them side by side and make some final adjustments to both to make sure they look like a series of ads and bring them in line with each other. So hope you enjoyed this. I found this kind of interesting. It was definitely fun, and thanks for watching.